as we're ending 2017, I am proud to actually introduce our special guest, who is our last guest for 2017. I'm proud to introduce Andre Vasquez. Welcome to Harlens Media. So like I said before, you are officially our last guest for 2017. We are ending the year with you, sir. And so for our viewers and subscribers, can you give us a little background into who you are and your history with activism?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, my name's Andre Vasquez. I'm from the 40th Ward in Chicago. During the primaries, I guess first and foremost, I'm a father and a husband. We have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I think that made me really have different perspective on what involvement means at a local level. Mm-hmm. So I was paying attention first to the primaries, and Bernie had said a lot of things that connected with me. So it wasn't necessarily a personality thing more than speaking about values that I definitely cared about. So I was sharing like crazy on Facebook, and a friend of mine invited me to go see him because her brother was an alderman. Her brother was Alderman Carlos Rosa. So I got to see Bernie, and that it went from, being something that you can watch on social media and kind of talk to people about to really feeling inspired to actually take action. So I started knocking on doors in Iowa, came back here and decided to put together a fundraiser called Burn Fest, which was the day before the primary in Illinois.
Right.
And through that process of like just putting together a fundraiser and trying to do my part, so to speak, I was able to meet a lot of community organizations, namely Reclaim Chicago, the People's Lobby. And from there, just started formally organizing. Came up with the idea for Chicago Progress, which was like, I viewed it as like an onboarding experience for someone who may not have been familiar with any of the stuff going on. I think we don't have formal ways to teach people local government, right? You don't learn it in school. So I started creating a bit of a platform to do that and kind of get the word out about things that were happening. And through that process, it just got me more involved and more passionate about understanding what voice and power we all have as a community. And since then, just getting the word out. And I think I've been focusing hyper-local, so I've been really thinking about the 40th Ward. And the plan is to run for city council at some point.
Now, you have your own Facebook page where you talk about the 40th Ward. What is it about the 40th Ward, as not only as a person who lives there, but why does it stand out to you? Why do you want to fight for it?
Sure.
What is there, the community, the culture? Because we've been all over Chicago, Pilsen, Northwest Side, South Austin, and numerous other communities as well. Mm-hmm. What's important about the 40th Ward?
I think for me, there's an opportunity there. Right. So, after, to kind of give you my thought process behind it, right? After the primaries, I was disappointed, and I really viewed the general election going either way. So when ultimately Trump won, I wasn't surprised more than like really, really angry. I could have taken that anger and kind of like just screamed resist Trump, right? But I don't know that it would have been the best use of it. Mm-hmm. So after going to like the Women's March and seeing 250,000 like people out there, immediately I started thinking, what would happen if we turned all those people's attention to the local level? And like, what impact would you then have there? So I started kind of scaling it down, and that brought me to focus on the 40th Ward, which is where I live, right? Like, what impact could I have if, we're going to raise our kids in that area? Like, what are we doing to help better it rather than just complain about it?
Right.
So the 40th Ward is, it's interesting, to be completely honest, right? Like, I think some wards have identities that people get. Like, if you mention the 49th Ward, it's a very progressive, activist community. If you mention the 35th, because of Alderman Rosa, like the same kind of thing. The 40th, due to the geography and some of the longstanding status quo that's there, I think it's challenging for it to find its identity. So there's this cemetery, Rose Hill Cemetery, in the middle of the ward. So it's shaped like a donut, right?
Oh, wow. And
what that does is it kind of fractures what would be a community, right? You've got all these separate neighborhoods that are next to each other but don't really have a meeting space. So what began as just organizing, try to put that together, like let's find out who has similar values and wants to like have meetings. Through Reclaim Chicago, we started putting together a North Side chapter. We did events called Drinks and Discourse, where we just have a setup at a bar and just say, hey, come on in, regardless of your level of understanding. Feel free to come in, ask questions. Politics are anything but taboo here. And I think that created an environment where we then found a lot more people who wanted to come like regular meetings and do canvases. So I think the opportunity is there to kind of craft the identity and really build community. I don't know that that's happened to the extent that it could be. Right. So that's kind of how I view the award presently.
Now, about your group, it's called Chicago Progress. Mm-hmm. And in its mission statement, it states, Chicago Progress was born out of a growing frustration with a political system that too often fails to represent the people. Although issues such as corruption, monetary influence, lack of transparency, and exclusion in the political process are nothing new, the 2016 election served as a tipping point for many of us, while also revealing the significant number of Americans that share the same frustrations. Our response was to channel that anger and disillusionment into push for real change starting at the local level. What has been your group's outreach to getting local communities involved, and what has been the response from, let's say, local government officials?
Yeah, I think what we see, I look at it as timing, right? Mm-hmm. It was very much a tipping point, right? I think the general public had a sense of what they wanted to see, that policies were not put in place to take care of their needs. When we look at how government allocates resources, people who are poor remain poor and the rich remain rich, right, or growing even more. That in itself created kind of a backlash where people, and in the way the election played out, wanted a populist response. And in the general election, I think their options were a nationalist populist response in Donald Trump and someone who to them represented like the political establishment, regardless of parties. So when we talk to folks now, understanding that I think, in my estimation, that had a bigger impact on the results than a lot of the other variables that obviously did. When talking to folks now, people, the public, they all get that. You knock on doors and everyone thinks they're getting jerked. They know that that's the case. They have a problem with the status quo. They have a problem with politicians that talk the talk but don't walk the walk, or even worse, don't even advocate for the values that we all share. That'll say, it's not possible in this political climate, and here's what we're trying to fight for. I think you see that at all levels. It's very easy to find elected officials who are going to say, like, we're standing against Trump and we're going to fight and we're resisting and this is what we're doing. And then when you try to pin them down on values and a vision for what we should be doing or what direction we should go in, there's a lot of there aren't a lot of clear answers. I think that's the problem. You don't get progress when you're talking about resistance, right? The best you can do is hold ground, and people just aren't standing for it anymore.
I'm curious to your reaction to this. I've always said that Trump was like every term you get a neoliberal president in, or just neo, really.
Yeah.
Whether it doesn't really much side. It's like rolling a six-sided dice, and Trump is just landing on a six.
Yeah, I think so. Trump is a little bit of an enigma, right? Yeah. Because clearly he's a little nuts. Yeah. Like that we can agree on, right?
What?
Yeah, I know. It's shocking. Sorry.
Not on this air.
Right. Yeah. But also he doesn't get credit for how good he is at like marketing and branding, which I think were really strengths. Like when he's decimating, was it 16, 17 candidates in the Republican Party just because he knows how to brand them, right? Lying Ted Cruz and like
low energy Jeb.
Right. He just really knew how to take advantage of that situation and brand people and like lock that in. I don't. What I consider him as is an apex opportunist. That the environment was there. He knew how to like manipulate that because he understood media really well and took advantage of that. But to your point, the environment was ripe for it because of, either hardcore Republican policies when you had Republican presidents or neoliberal policies after, where you get the identity politics and the recognition of different communities and marginalized groups But when you talk about revenue and the actual monetary system, that didn't really change.
Right.
So ultimately, you have two parties that don't solve the problem, and a public looking for something completely different. Because if after 2 or 3 decades of that environment, you're not getting your needs met, you're getting poor, and you think that your kids are going to have a worse life than you are, that amount of desperation leads to reflexive responses without thinking about the consequences, right? You get Brexit similarly, where they go, if my government is supposed to take care of me and it isn't, then what's behind door number 2?
Right.
And that's where we end up.
And also, if you have the two of the most least popular candidates in U.S. history, another consequence you get is lack of involvement. 46.9% of the U.S. population chose not to vote, and you could divide that group into two groups: people who were unable or could not register to vote, and the other half were just people who just didn't like Trump or Clinton.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there's so many factors there, right? I mean, even if it's not, you can say what you will about the candidate, but if the campaign after a divided primary, right, the base was fractured. Like, I think we can all kind of agree that you had your hardcore left.
We
and
saw
you had
firsthand over there in
Absolutely,
Philadelphia,
right?
Yeah.
So to see that, and then for the campaign to say we should probably move to the middle and peel off some more Republican votes, without shoring up the base, not even giving them like a VP candidate, that because really the left was like, give us anything. We'll be more than happy to kind of like move in that direction, but don't just ignore what just happened in the primary. Yeah.
It's an instance, I think, at least right now that we're really on the topic, that I think there's so many single things Hillary could have done. If she'd said at some point, "Yeah, I'm not going to back the TPP," she could have gotten all the votes she didn't get just by doing that. I mean,
well, and to be fair, because I've had a lot of time since to kind of like really ease up of how I felt, right? But to be fair, had she done that, like people would have still said, well, she's flip-flopping. I don't know if I believe her, right? So I think it became the difference also is media in itself, right? Everyone gets everything up to the minute, like responses on what's going on. You're talking to people about it. That's different in this election. Like in the first election Obama won, you kind of see hints of it. But this now is like you're plugged into your phone 24/7. Like, oh, did you catch this? Here's the clip. Let's share it amongst 1 million people. So I think that created hyper attention for people that were paying attention.
Question everything.
Yeah. Right.
And mentality, as we all should be.
Yeah, and you're so you got an environment like that. And one of the candidates is a reality show star.
Yeah.
Used to it. Like lives in an environment where like, yeah, they're going to tweet everything. I live on tweets. And really knew how to take advantage of it. Yeah, I think it's I think we have a lot to learn, because for the other side of that coin, I don't know that Bernie Sanders would have been as competitive without social media, right? Like, had we not been sharing that and talking about it, you wouldn't see him getting 43 to 46% of the Democratic vote.
Yeah, and plus he managed to catch up like 60 points.
He made a 60-point gap as someone unknown compared to one of the most well-known people in modern history.
Right.
But that's the power of social media. I mean, the most recent election is a great indication of what it can do and how it can influence candidates. And, the fact that Bernie won, 23 states?
Yeah, he
something
won
like
about
that.
23 states. But mind you, some of the states that he lost, there's a big question, because one thing that's happened, especially during his primary, it's caused a lot of people to really question our system. So I think for you, what I want to ask you specifically, because you're part of a group that's trying to outreach its community and get people actively involved. And I think the one thing a lot of Americans, no matter whether they're independents, Republicans, or Democrats, the one thing they all can say is, I'm not really that informed on the candidates, even on my own political party. I mean, a lot of people are not really impressed with the establishment system, because the people in Washington, D.C. don't really represent the working class families. And that goes for everyone on the political spectrum. So we have seen since the aftermath of the 2016 general election cycle that more Americans are becoming actively involved. And that's including local and federal politics and policies. And the 2018 midterm election cycle is going to be playing a large impact on our country very soon. And that's also including the 2019 Chicago mayoral run, as well as the 2020 presidential election cycle. So for your group, Chicago Progress, what is your response to getting people to register to vote, get actively involved on the candidates and campaigns, and what have you guys been doing to really helping people understand the issues that are affecting their local communities.
Sure. So Chicago Progress is kind of, to be frank, in a stage of development. So it went from me thinking about, like, when I was knocking on doors and canvassing, I would look and say, it would be effective if every door I knocked, I had like an app and said, like, here, put this on your phone. You'll find out what's going on, like, in your neighborhood. You can see a calendar of events, have a forum, and also like vote and referendum on ideas and kind of develop the two-way kind of relationship.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at how people receive their information, and it is very personal for me, like that's where I was really keeping up to date on everything, was my phone was delivering all this information to me, right? So, prior to that, you'd have to pay for like TV spots and like get on any kind of media format. But now you have
newspapers.
Absolutely, right? Now you have a means of distribution that everyone has. So it's been evolving from like this app idea to like creating content. So what you guys do is key, right? If you guys weren't having these conversations regularly, how would people know what's going on in the city? So it's just about expanding that. When it comes to more of the formal organizing and talking to folks, that's been a lot of more of the Reclaim Chicago work. And I think it starts in a lot of different ways. So we have a process to go talk to candidates and figure out who we're going to endorse and look at the values that represent our values and kind of advocating for that. But larger than that is really delivering a greater understanding of why we're in this space, of how this, like, people love to say how broken our system is. I think that's not necessarily correct. I think the system's working as designed perfectly, right? So what we do is really have an analysis about how racial capitalism is really what creates this, right? This idea that as long as the 1% make their profit, everything else can get figured out. Yeah. And there's a system that pits all of us against each other. And that's across racial lines, across gender lines, across class, across everything. It's just this
divide and conquer.
Yeah, it's literally a categorization of things.
On that note, this just reminded me. So we were talking about homelessness and how in Chicago, when homeless people are in a rich neighborhood, they'll just take their tents, take their blankets away, so they have to move somewhere else. And I was also reading that in San Francisco, where there's another, it's a homeless, and I say problem, of course, just because it's the terminology that's currently used with it. Mm-hmm. Instead of doing that, those same rich people are like, oh, we're more progressive, so we let them use it like a
spot,
a parking lot,
yeah,
so that they're inside and away from us, so because they used to be in their cars on the street,
right?
And so they're like, we'll just put them in that lot, and they get to be there from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. Then we need the lot for our cars.
Well, so that's the very problem with neoliberalism, right? It's saying we're not as bad as those guys, so we could totally pat ourselves on the back.
But we're still
not.
We
don't need to see
it's
it.
Not solving the problem.
Yeah,
it's just different ways of addressing different types of band-aids.
Yes, and it's a microcosm at different levels of what goes on in the city, right? So me being a parent of a 4-year-old, like starting to look into like kindergarten and what school's gonna be. I understand just staring at it at a bird's eye view of it. It's the same thing. It's like you deplete the resources, right? You're not funding CPS and the schools properly, so that families go, maybe I have to leave. Maybe I need to go to the suburbs, which is intended, right? Because then you displace that amount of people to get other people with more income coming in, and you can go through this whole story of like, let's give Amazon $2.25 billion in tax breaks because that's going to bring more jobs to all these new people moving in. So it is very much similar of like, if this is the problem, let's find a way to like, let's get it off of our map and like figure it out.
From our coverage, when we were talking to people like Fritz Craigie, who's running for assessor, it's a system of the TIF system, especially in the property taxes, where you overtax the people you want to move out, so their money would normally, the property taxes would normally just go to their schools, but then you pull half of those property taxes and put them back towards the city, which then you devaluate in taxes, so then you have to raise the taxes on those people.
Right.
So then that cycle continues.
Yeah, and it all goes back to, those affluent members who are having their properties undervalued are the same ones donating to campaigns, right? Like if I want to make sure that we keep the system going, I'm going to support the candidate that keeps me here. and gets rid of the quote-unquote riffraff.
Money in politics, once again,
Absolutely.
playing a role in our democracy, like Citizens United and McCutcheon's decision, in which basically money is speech, corporations are people, and if you have the most money, and if there's somebody there that will fight for you the hardest, you're going to definitely give that person all the money so that they have a seat in power, and they in turn look out for your interests.
Well, and now they're taking it a step further, right? They're saying, well, I could save some money without buying a politician because I'm a millionaire. Why don't I just run? Right?
Well,
like our president totally removed the standard of the barrier to entry. So now everyone with money can say, I want to run for governor or whatever.
Yeah, we see that with Pritzker, and Rauner is a billionaire, you know.
It reminds me very much of the medieval era where 95% of the time the side with the bigger army won. Bigger army diplomacy. Mm-hmm. Now it's 95% of the time the guy with the most money wins. Bigger money diplomacy.
Yeah. And that's why a big part of like our campaign and my campaign when we get to it is a fair elections ordinance. Is really talking about publicly funded elections where you take small donations and you match them 6 times over so that people who actually want to run can run, right? As a person of color and as someone who like grew up in the streets of Chicago, we have our own mental hurdles that keep us from being the person in the front of the room. Like, why should I be in office? The money needed to run is a much bigger hurdle that's there on top of that. If you can remove that by having publicly funded elections, you then open the range of people that can run in the range of ideas. And that's really exciting. And, you know, there was a referendum on it in the 2015 municipal elections where like close to, I want to say 80% of the voters wanted something like that. But when you talk to the aldermen in different wards, right, you get different responses. So I think it's just about keeping campaigns like that, keep the public aware of things like that and really behind it to put pressure to move something in that direction.
Right. Because I think what a lot of people fail to realize is that the Democrat and Republican establishment system, they all know the same people. Yeah. They all know the people in Wall Street. They all know the same banks. They all know the same corporations. They know all the top 1% donors. So in many ways, people kind of feel helpless when they look at the two-party establishment system. So for you who you know, you're part of a community organizing group, Chicago Progress, you're trying to reach out to people. What do you try to say to people to like to at least motivate them that no, it's not only establishment candidates, there's other people who are running too. Like what do you want to say about that?
There's different levels of that, right? If you talk to just a person on the street, they'll tell you that they don't like the status quo, but they don't know much else than that. We don't have a system to teach them that. So what we're working on is developing kind of like a city level civics, right? To be able to talk through that. Because some of it is people aren't tired. They just don't have the education of it and aren't in circles where people do, right? Like, yes, in community organizing circles and in places like this where we can be wonky and talk about it, I feel comfortable because we're doing it. But someone who isn't and hasn't been exposed to it walks in and says, all right, this isn't for me, and I'm out. So some of it's that education gap. The other one is really figuring out what people's personal self-interest and stake is in local government at all. We need to change the way people think of local government. Our priorities are just backwards. We're busy listening to developers and millionaires and ignoring like the people that actually live in the city that need a public funded school system, that need affordable housing. And we'd have to turn that on its head. And I think the more you get candidates that advocate for that and groups that talk about it, you start building the consensus that helps you win elections.
All right. And I think our final question I want to ask you, and I think a lot of our viewers want to know too, you mentioned Chicago Progress. You guys are just starting up. You're building yourselves up. Where can we find you guys on social media and online?
Sure. Yeah, so I would direct people to either chicagoprogress.com, reclaimchicago.org. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's Andre Vasquez CP. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty much on Facebook very often. You can totally reach me, and I'd be happy to help and direct people. For Reclaim Chicago, there's different chapters in the city. Mm-hmm. So depending where somebody lives, we can totally connect you with someone that's right nearby to join our events and help us fight this fight, because it really should be like what the rest of our lives are about.
Well, I can promise you this, Heartlands Media is definitely going to follow through, and let's keep an open communication, not only between ourselves, but other groups affiliated with you. And
Absolutely.
We're going to end this episode of 2017. Andre, thank you for being our last guest.
Yes,
thank you guys
very much.
If you like what we do, we're an independent media outlet, so we have a Patreon page. Visit our Patreon page. See how you can help us out and contribute to this thing that we're building here. Because Chicago needs independent media, and Heartlands Media can lead the battle for truth and actually get some things done. So we could cover the stories that you don't see covered by corporate media. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting us so far. Check out our archived work on YouTube, on our Facebook page, on Twitter, on Instagram. Peace to everyone, and let's all do what we can to build a better future.
Everyone, it's been a great year talking to you. Actually, technically, it's only really been a calendar year. It's not even been a full year for us. And in that time, we've gone from no one knowing who we were, who we are, to we have this fantastic radio show we get to talk to you from every week. We get our technical abilities now allow us to podcast everything. Mm-hmm. We have our work that we do on CAN TV. We're very thankful for the people that have joined us and have been following us in this time. And I feel that, we've really been around for 9 months and we've accomplished a lot. And I want to do so much more. I know all of us sitting here want to do so much more next year. And we're going to be here for the city. We're going to be here for the country and the world, because I know we have a few international people that listen to us. And I just want to say, guys, we're just getting started.
Yeah, and Lauren, you've definitely been a new member of the team. Is there any kind of final words you want to say for 2017?
Well, I was just going to pose a question. What are you guys hoping the most for in 2018?
Well, definitely at least more coverage, talking to more candidates, and talking to more activist groups, and getting Heartlands Media out there all over Chicago, but perhaps all over Illinois, and perhaps seen internationally. So there we go. That's a big dream, but that's what I want.
I'd like in the next year, if we could get a dedicated studio we can operate out of, if we can actually start paying, means we're all volunteers. If I can start paying people, we can get a bigger team, because at this point
it's just me and Daniel.
It's me, Daniel, Lauren. Wait,
no, it's you and me, Daniel, basically.
And Lauren's joined us recently for investigative, and Paul's going to be coming back, but covering the city. I mean,
in the state.
We only could do so much.
That we need to grow. It's our, as I see it, it's our duty as Heartlands Media to bring voice to people that don't have a voice, to bring up issues that are ignored by corporate media, and simply put, to move the energy that and the systems that represent the country, the state, the county, the world, in a direction that's more optimal for people with less.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's a good note to end it on. And Lauren, is there anything you want for 2018 for us, for Heartlands Media?
I would love if we got Rauner or the mayor to call in. I have some questions for them, and I think that would be a nice perspective to be able to grill everybody, not just the people that we like to. I'm not saying that we've only had people on the show that we've liked. But
I'd love for them to contact us.
I'd love to talk to Rauner.
All right, Mayor Emanuel, Governor Bruce Rauner, we're calling you out. Check us out. Other than that, thank you everyone for tuning in. If you like what we do, check out our Patreon page. Peace. Have a safe New Year's Eve and New Year's Day.
Yes.
See you all in 2018.
You're watching Heartlands Media.